Energized for today's next talk. So the topic is gender equality, a key driver of workplace wellness. We're going to be joined by Dr. Niki Vincent, who commenced as Victoria's first public sector Gender Equality Commissioner in 2020. She oversees the implementation of the Gender Equality Act 2020 and plays a key leadership role in promoting gender equality in the community and in workplaces. Niki also serves as a board member of In Touch Multicultural Centre Against Family Violence and the Brave Foundation, which supports teenage parents. She's a wealth of experience in gender equality and organisational leadership, including serving as South Australian Commissioner for Equal Opportunity, as CEO of the Leaders Institute of South Australia, and as a member of the SA Remuneration Tribunal. Let's please welcome Dr. Niki to the stage.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks very much. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Gadigal land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who might be here today. A while ago, one of my sons told me that he'd been offered a job with a promotion and a substantial pay rise, and he turned it down. Why? Because the company he was with at the time allowed him the flexibility in his start time each morning so that he could take his daughter to school, something the other company wasn't willing to do. He would have been paid more and had more development opportunities, but the company didn't give him what he valued most, and it clearly showed him what they valued. This is an example that shows that workplaces that offer flexibility will attract employees, men, women, non-binary people, and we can't underestimate the role of workplaces in contributing to or undermining wellness. However, as much as individual people want change, we can't achieve gender equality without making change at a systemic level. We know that gender equality in employment opportunities, in lack of flexibility, and the gender pay gap can have negative impacts on well-being, and so can workforce composition. Research has recently found that women working in male-dominated sectors, such as finance and construction, were more likely to face negative stereotyping in the workplace. This diminished their well-being at work and meant they were less likely to remain in the role or to recommend the field to other women. Bringing more women into fields where they've been traditionally underrepresented is key to create the critical mass of women necessary to reduce negative stereotyping and devaluing of women. At the same time, employing more women can also have positive impacts on workplace mental health by challenging the macho stereotype, macho culture in male-dominated industries, especially around bullying. And research has found that workplaces with more women in decision-making roles are much more productive. So equality and diversity contributes to the organisation's own overall wellness, particularly in terms of its performance and culture. It's also vital that we're creating culturally safe and inclusive workplaces that recognise the intersecting identities and allow people to bring their full selves to work. Gender equality is equal rights, opportunities and responsibilities, regardless of gender. It sounds simple, but organisations are still very much struggling to achieve this in their workplaces. Women remain underrepresented in leadership and even in majority women industries like healthcare and in the public sector, that is still the case. Women and gender diverse people are more likely than men to experience sexual harassment. And yet, despite years of work, the gender pay gap still exists. Women in heterosexual relationships are still expected to take on the majority of caring and unpaid work in the home, which is a considerable burden, with 52% of working caregivers reporting that they feel exhausted. Caregivers are also twice as likely to feel time poor at work and more likely to be considering quitting. It's clear that we can't go on the way that we have been going. In fact, the current estimate from the World Economic Forum is that without action, it's going to take another 132 years to close the global gender gap. progress towards closing that gap has actually stalled in most countries. In fact, the UN just recently revealed there's been no improvement in bias against women in a decade. Almost 9 out of 10 people worldwide still hold a fundamental bias against women. We can see this, as I said, in the underrepresentation of women in leadership. On average, the share of women as heads of state or heads of government has remained around 10% since 1995. In the global labour market, women make up less than a third of management. Women are more skilled and more educated than ever before, and yet even in the 59 countries where women are now more educated than men, the average gender income gap remains a staggering 39% in favour of men. In Victoria, the Gender Equality Act came into effect in 2021. It is the first of its kind, and I am the inaugural commissioner. It covers more than 300 organisations, including all of the public service, local councils, universities, there are 9 in Victoria, water corporations, public health, all the arts organisations and so forth. They are employing around 450,000 workers. That's around 12% of the workforce in Victoria. These organisations, every single one of them, have to apply a gender lens to every policy, program or service that they develop that has a direct and significant impact on the public. They have to collect data on what they're doing, and they have to report that to me every 2 years, and that data and those reports are all made public. They also need to regularly conduct audits every 2 years of their workplaces and report to me on their data and on their plans and progress on addressing any inequalities that they find. Again, every 2 years, they report to me on the progress that they've made, and they must, under the legislation, make reasonable and material progress in every 2 years. I make all of their data and all of their plans and progress reports public, and they must also make them public. So there's transparency, but I also have strong compliance powers. If the worst comes to the worst, I can actually take an organisation to Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal to get an order directing them to comply with the legislation. I don't think I'll ever have to do that because I think the transparency will drive the change more than anything else. There are 7 key indicators against which we measure their workforce progress. The workforce gender composition, which we set because by collecting and reporting data on gender composition at all levels, organisations can see where they could benefit from greater gender diversity and take action to support women into senior roles. We also collect data on the composition of their governing body. We know that in the past, women have been underrepresented on government boards or public boards in Victoria, but we set some targets in 2015 and those have now been met. So we now have at least 50% of women on boards and as chairs, and that shows how targets can actually have a positive effect, but we're interested in maintaining that. Gender pay equity, which remains a key issue in all industries and is a key measure of gender inequality. There's a saying that you can't manage what you don't measure, and research has shown that organisations that regularly measure and report on their gender pay gap actually close the gap faster than those that don't. Workplace sexual harassment, a really key indicator. This has considerable psychological and physical and economic costs for victims and survivors, organisations and society. And currently the vast majority of sexual harassment goes underreported, so around 80% goes unreported. So it's probably even more prevalent than we understand. So organisations have to provide data on the number of sexual harassment incidents that were formally reported to them and on their outcome, including if they have any non-disclosure agreements and so forth in place. But they also are required to conduct anonymous employee experience surveys so that people can feel safer to report their experiences of sexual harassment to the organisation, which then gets reported to me. So we can see what the difference is between the formal reporting and the experience of sexual harassment. Recruitment and promotion is the fifth indicator. We know that this is a problem, that discrimination in recruitment and promotion is a problem in terms of people's entering an organisation, but also their progress through the organisation. So we're collecting data on that as well. Leave and flexibility is the other indicator. In Australia, parenthood stalls the career progression of women, but it has absolutely no impact on the career progression of men. It's still a rare thing for a man to take parental leave as the primary carer, and those who do face recriminations, often from their colleagues or their workplace in general, as they're often seen as less serious about their career. Women are also much more likely to work part-time or flexibly to balance the paid work with their caring responsibilities in the home. By collecting data on who's accessing flexible work, organisations can see where extra support might be needed, both for women and for men and people of other genders, particularly in encouraging men to take on more of the childcare and housework responsibilities. And then finally, the seventh indicator is gendered work segregation. So even when organisations have gender balance, they are 50-50 women or something similar, we often see that women are concentrated into particular roles in an organisation. And we know that industries that are majority men are seen as, such as construction or transport or emergency services, tend to be better paid and more respected in society, contributing to the gender pay gap, of course. In contrast, majority women industries, such as nursing and early childhood education, which are associated with feminine stereotypes related to caring, are less respected and less well paid. We want to ensure that everyone in our state, regardless of their gender, has equal opportunity to ensure there's a pipeline of skilled workers, and we've got lots of interventions in place to deal with that in Victoria. So we've had the first lot of data was reported to me in December 2021. And it's given us a baseline from which to measure improvement. The next lot of data will be reported to me in February 2024. What we found is that, as we thought, women are underrepresented in senior leadership positions, with women comprising 66% of the employees across the workforce of which we're collecting data from, but only 46% of senior leadership roles. More than 3 in 5 CEOs are men, so there's still a very significant gap to close. Across all the organisations that report to me, the average pay gap between men and women when taking into account their total remuneration was 15.6%. So a whopping pay gap. That means that on average, men took home $19,000 a year more than women. And in some parts of their sector, the pay gap was much bigger. So in those male-dominated sectors, we had really much larger pay gaps. In our data set, every single occupation had a pay gap in favour of men, and that includes the traditionally female-dominated sectors such as healthcare and clerical work. Even in those sectors, men were paid more than women. And every industry, except for one, and that one industry was the arts, had pay gaps in favour of men. Women were, as you'd imagine, significantly overrepresented in part-time work and made up 3/4 of those who were using formal flexible work arrangements and nearly 70% of those who were taking carers' leave. So we know women still carry the majority of responsibilities for unpaid work. Women were also less likely to receive career development and training opportunities, internal secondments and higher duties. Men make up only 34% of the public sector workforce overall, but they received 37% of promotions. And as I said, more than their proportional share of development opportunities. So we know women still aren't getting equal opportunities for career advancement. This was the first time that we'd collected this data, and there were a lot of data gaps that we have asked organisations to fix. And a key data gap was in intersectional data, so the way that gender overlaps with attributes such as race, disability, age, religion and sexuality to potentially compound experiences of gender inequality. So in order to better understand this, we took what data we did have and commissioned 5 additional pieces of research to actually take that data out to communities with lived experience, to talk to them about their own experience, but also to get advice from them about how organisations can better collect that data in the future. And we'll also publish a dedicated intersectionality report in August of this year, so stay tuned for that. One of the big things that we found is that although gender equality benefits everyone, the vast majority of people doing the work in diversity and inclusion and collecting the data and developing the plans and doing all the consultation are women. And they are often employed in insecure, short-term contract positions, often working part-time without any other support and balancing work with caring responsibilities. Precarious employment is recognised as a key social determinant of health. And for women, negative impacts, particularly for mental health, can be greater because of the burdens of responsibility that they carry, and because of the gender divisions of paid and unpaid labour and conceptualisations of what a normative worker is and the patriarchal power structures. And this can mean that women doing this work hold responsibility yet little agency or influence on leadership, which is a combination that puts them at risk of stress and burnout. So I'll be working very closely with organisations to make sure that, as the legislation requires, they are appropriately resourcing this work and driving it at a leadership level to support the wellbeing of staff members who are doing the work. I think there is a push now, and I'm from Victoria. We set up the whole commission and recruited all of our staff under lockdown conditions. So we didn't even have an office when we came out of lockdown. We had to establish ourselves as an in-person place when we'd worked only as at working at home organisation. And I think that's testament to the fact that hybrid workplaces can have strong cultures and productivity. We implemented the legislation, we collected all of this data, we made the investment in the technology that we needed, and we did it with people working from their bedrooms and lounge rooms most of the time, and up to the point that we collected that first lot of data. So flexibility, I think, is key to our success and to many organisations' success. And I would urge organisations to harness the benefits that hybrid work offers, both the people and organisations, while at the same time being mindful of possible new inequalities emerging from things like proximity bias. So if you're actually in the office, you get seen more and you're more likely to get promotions and job opportunities and so forth. As I mentioned before, diversifying leadership brings wellbeing benefits to the wider organisation, but workplaces often lack the pipeline of talented women rising up the ranks. Outdated expectations and structures mean that that we often think that leaders must work full-time hours, and that's part of the barrier. Flexibility, including part-time and job-sharing roles, can address this pipeline gap while at the same time improving employee well-being. I'm proud to say that the CEO role, or the director role of the commission, my commission, is undertaken as a job share between one woman who is studying half-time and another woman who's just had her second child and come back from maternity leave. Not only can I draw on the leadership expertise and experience of two people who think quite differently but are working together beautifully, but my directors are able to balance their career with caring responsibilities and further study, and also bounce ideas off each other. So that makes the job better for all of us, I think. So to conclude, the Act's driven a much greater focus and action on gender equality and consequently workplace culture and wellness in Victoria. In February next year, I'll get the first reports from organisations into the progress they've made, and this will provide the kind of transparency that we've never had before and keep workplaces accountable to their staff and to the broader community. And I have to say the media has been very interested in that progress as well. So I hope this will provide a model for others to follow and inspire change outside of Victoria. Stay tuned, and thanks very much for having me today.